All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. My name is Adam, and I'll be stepping you through today's session. We will be, hold on, let me get rid of this thing. Okay, so we'll be talking today about basically view building best practices. So essentially some things to keep in mind when building views. You'll also notice that we'll be talking about quite a few features and functionality type things that you can take advantage of as well. But generally, speaking, how do I build these views better for my community, for my business users, and make them more meaningful for my users? So that's kind of what we want to cover today, and much of this obviously will be with Viewer version 6. Basically we'll talk about some things that you want to think about when you're building views, things to keep in mind. We'll be talking about also some different tips of features and functionality you can take advantage of, such as graphing and the ability to drill to other views. And we'll also look at setting up parameters and parameter groups so that you can query the user before the view actually shows any data. We'll look at also some View Explorer tips using time range and versus time as a dimension, and some new column header customizations as well. So when you're building a view, typically you just want to just throw something out there without thinking about what it is that you're building. So essentially you'd want to make sure that you understand how the view that you're building is going to be used. So that also in turn would help you think about what dimensions to include in the view. If you're building a view for sales reps, typically you're going to want to include product-related dimensions, customer-related dimensions. These are things that a typical sales rep would want to see. Perhaps geographical dimensions, such as where the sales occurred. These are things that when you want to build a view for a sales rep, you want to put on a sales rep hat and essentially kind of think about how they would look at the data. Of course, discussing and communicating with the users and getting their ideas of what they want to see as well. Maybe looking at current reports is another thing that you can use as well. So, a sales rep versus a finance guy, these are probably going to be two different views. Sales guys typically are going to want to see their sales dollars versus some sort of forecast or a budget or a target, so that way they can see how they're attaining, or maybe they're short or exceeding their goal for the quarter, for the month, and for the year for that matter. So they might have different phases of time, that are needed within that view so they can see current month versus year-to-date sales dollars versus a budget or something that they can compare themselves to. Finance, those users are typically generally interested in profit and gross margin percentages. These things are very common, so finance can see what the profitability margins are. Another thing finance is very keen on is making sure that to close the month every month and close the books on the month. So they might use Stratum to help them reconcile what sales says and revenue for the month, so that they can then close the books for that fiscal month. So these two examples, as you can tell, these are two different users, and they're probably going to have two different types of views, and so it really is good to understand exactly who your users are, what your community is, and the different departments that they work for, so that you can understand what levels you want to include, what different measures or data items that you want to include in that view. I've seen other views out there that are generically written, some sort of one-size-fits-all view that includes everything, that typically doesn't work as well. You'll have a view that maybe has too much in it, too many data elements, too many measures, too many different levels that are and there's really never any thought given to what levels that they would need to drill to. So, and from that, you might have different levels in there that relate to different types of data altogether, so that would yield nothing for the users. So again, you want to just understand what the users are looking for, what levels you want to include, and really kind of get a really thorough understanding of how they would use this view. When you're building a view, another thing to consider is how the view is going to perform. When you build a view, typically, not a good practice would be to build a view. A good practice would be to build a view that would start out at a fairly high level to a mid-level, so that the users aren't opening the view up at a very low, highly detailed level that might cause the view to process for a while. For instance, if you build a view and you open the view up at invoice level without any filtering or aggregations, you're going to be waiting for a while, I would think, because it's such a highly populated, detailed level. However, if you include customer, territory, and company, and you start out at company and then you drill to territory and then to customer and then finally to the invoice level, well, then that view is going to perform a lot better than just starting the view out at invoice level. So these are the things, typically you'd build a view in such a fashion that the levels would be in order of how you would visualize the users drilling down. So when the view is initially run, it starts out at the high to medium levels and allows them to go ahead and drill down to further detail. So typically you don't want to start them at too low level of detail. But if you do need to do something like that, you also can use parameter groups. This is something that we'll talk about a little later. You can use parameter groups to help them filter the data so that they're not running, a wide open query and causing the server to be strained or stressed out. Okay. Calculations is another thing. When you build your calculations, there are certain things that you want to include or remember to make sure that the calculations perform properly as well. The calculations of subtotal and total rows are very time consuming. So typically, if the more the calculations you have in your view, the more time it's going to take to process. So, you want to make sure that you use your calculations wisely, and that again, I think by using the levels the way I just described, I think you'll have better performance. And then finally, to round out on some of these best practices, the actual application itself, when you're building views and creating users and whatnot, you also want to make sure that you group the views together in a meaningful fashion. Understand, how you might want to categorize the views, and the same could be said about your users. A lot of time when I implement the product, the customer will ask me, how do I do this? How do I deploy this? And typically what I would recommend them doing is, they would deploy it by department typically. So you would have a group of users, and then you would group them by, these are my sales guys. This is my finance group of users. These are my production users. So, that normally works pretty well because generally speaking, like I said, they're going to be looking for the same types of data. So the views that you build for them are typically going to be, again, grouped together into view groups such as these are sales views and these are production views. So normally that's how you want to organize viewer, is typically by department, and that is typically what I see out there today that works pretty well, so that you can keep your views and your users organized by the different departments that you have in your enterprise. And again, just kind of, we talked about this. I don't want to, discuss this too much ad nauseum here, but again, when you create your views, your drill down path, like I said, the ordering of the levels is very important. I'm going to just build a view from scratch for you today, and these are the things that I would consider when I build my view. And maybe there's some things that hopefully you'll see that will resonate well with you. The view description. Here's another thing that's probably not talked about as much, but when you save a view, you can actually write a mini novel about it. I'm joking, of course, but you can certainly write a few sentences about what the view entails. Because when the user sees a new view out there, all they have is the view title. And, of course, you can't write too much there. You don't want to have a view title that's too long. The view name itself should be meaningful as well. Sales this year versus last. By customer. Maybe you might want to describe how the view starts out. And then in the description, you could say this view starts at customer level, includes year-to-date, month-to-date sales, dollars, and units. And that's it. I mean, it doesn't have to be crazy, but just some things that tell the user a little bit more about the view. And when they see this is when they hover over their cursor over the view. So when they maybe they're curious, and the user can then hover the cursor over the view name, and the description will pop up, and will tell them a little bit more about the view. So just something as simple as filling out the view description can really work wonders and give the user a bit more information about, what that view entails. Just some simple things. Okay. So that's kind of it on view building best practices. Those are some things that I would recommend that you think about when you build views. Just generally speaking, those are things that you want to remember. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the different features and functions that might make your view work better. So some things to think about, such as filtering. In this case, we've got an example where you can filter. Many of you probably just do some filtering on member lists or user lists, and you might stay away from filtering by expression. If you notice, the filter type of expression can be used to basically write an expression to help you filter out data that you don't want to include in your view. And these can be pretty powerful. So if you filter by expression, you can actually have the filter dynamically filter things out of your view each time you run it. So it behaves a lot like a dynamic user list, actually. An examples here would be, in this case, we're using a calculate or an expression, essentially, to filter and only include, in this case, SKUs that have the word pair in the string of the actual description. So by using this type of filter, every time I run my view, this filter might include additional pair products that might be new that I'm currently then selling, maybe later on in the year. Well, those will automatically fall in to my view because they would have the word pair in the long description. So we're using this in-string function, and we're telling it to basically say, in string and use a 1 where the word pair is in my long description. So that would be the syntax. And if it's a 1, then you want the in-string function then to be not equal to 0. So basically we're just saying you find all the 1s. And that's really kind of what this expression does, behind the scenes. The filter, as you can see, is right here on your product number. So I can actually, apply that filter here at the product number level, and then use my filter by expression to write that expression, and then go ahead and apply my filter. If you need help with the expression, this expression itself is actually in your help document or online help. So if you actually look this up, you would actually be able to find this, and I can show you where you might be able to find some things like this. Okay. Another cool expression here, I like this one a lot, is perhaps maybe you want to exclude a question mark from your view. Maybe it doesn't have any data associated to it, but yet it just shows up from time to time. You could actually use the filter by expression to exclude question mark, where in this case we're saying use the customer sold to level current member dot name not equal to question mark, and then that would, as you can see, you can run the view, and then my question mark row would be gone. So if you ever want to exclude some things here, you don't even necessarily need to use a question mark. That might be a customer code that you want to exclude. Or it could be a series of customers that you could exclude from your list of filters here. So that, as you can see, the filter by expression is quite, it can be quite powerful. You can actually do some really cool things. Here's another example where I just want to filter on an attribute field. So in this case, I've got my products here, and I am showing my sales by product. I also have my attribute field of my ABC classification, so also displayed here as well. So my expression, again, my filter would then be such that it would say the actual attribute of my SKU ABC classification would equal A. And I'm using double quotes there to tell it that it's a string. So you would have to include the double quotes there to encapsulate your A there. But this filter then returns only A items. And so you can, as you can see, filter your items on an attribute field as well. So whether it's the code itself, the description, or any pickup field or attribute field at any level, you can use these filter by expression, these filters to really, again, really control the data that you want to include in that view, and to more intelligently filter out certain things that you want to exclude from that view. Switching gears a little bit here, just looking at some graphing best practices. Some of you do use some of the graphing capabilities. I know that many of you do not. However, if you do graph your data, and I know that some of you are looking into maybe building out some dashboards using viewer views, and in that case, using graphical views might be something you'd be interested in. The same thing really kind of applies here in terms of best practices. You've got characteristics of good graphs, and you've got characteristics of bad ones. And typically a good graph is clear. It's very clear. The clarity is you know what it's trying to tell you. So your graph, you really should focus on the graph conveying a single important message. What is it that you're trying to show me by using this graph? And a lot of that has to do with the actual graph type that you select, whether it's a pie chart or a bar graph or a line graph. Different graphs can really make the point that you're trying to make pop. I mean, it really makes it sing so that the users, when they see the graph, they say, I get it, So, again, you can use a combination. Certainly you can show a graph to show the different trends, and then the viewer grids can also be, you can show a combination, and you can also show the detail as well, if you want to, of course. And of course, just some of the common sense items here. The graph needs to be clean. It probably should have a relevant title to it. Maybe you want to also title the axes of the graph so that everything's labeled, so that the users know what it is that they're looking at. And to make it relevant, obviously the graph needs to tell a relevant story. And many of us make the same mistakes. We might want to graph too much. There might be too much detail that we want to graph. Maybe the data is too dispersed, or maybe it's too similar, and then my point gets lost in the conformity of the data within my graph. So, again, these are things that typically these are characteristics of a bad graph. If you're trying to graph too much, or if it's just not, the data that you have is just too similar, and you're not really, there's no point. So you have, with that being said, you have many different types of graphs to use to accomplish your goals here. And you're not going to use all of these, but I do see many, and I use several myself. And I recommend, obviously, a line graph really tells a story between a forecast dollar amount versus a sales amount over a trend of time. these are things that you're just going to learn by being a business user and being exposed to business, for the years that you have been working. And, a line graph can really tell a nice story. However, if you're really wanting to show one isolated customer or an item, the line graph would work well. But if you want to show multiple customers or items, it's going to be extremely busy. So maybe a column graph might work better in that area. So again, the decision of the graph type is going to be pretty important. And we also have a graph webinar that we give as well, and we'll reserve a lot of the details in terms of how to build these graphs to some of that. You can also drill within a graph. This is also very powerful. You can drill, maybe you'll have a pie chart where the user can then click in on the graph and drill down using just basically the graph itself. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. That is something that's available. Drilling within a graph, as you can see here, I can drill down. This is a good example of using a graph along with the data grid, so that you can see both graphical information and the data grid itself. If I click in on the graph, it would then drill me down to the next level. The data grid then follows my drill down. The pie chart, I really like these. If I click in on a specific piece of the pie here, it then drills me to the next level down, and the pie then shows me that level and the mix of the different types of products within my fresh vegetable category. So by clicking in on the blue, the fresh vegetables area, it then shows me the next graph down would be this graph here to the right. These work really, really well. Okay, so that's just a little ditty on some graphing. Again, we do provide more detail on graphing and how to build graphs. So make sure you check out upcoming sessions, and we also have some recorded sessions as well. And make sure you check those out. Some other things to make your your view building to take it to the next level is this concept of drilling to another view. I think this is probably a feature that is probably the most underused feature of Viewer, is this ability to take your user to a completely different view from one view to another. And it can be quite powerful if you think about it. And there's many different examples of why you might want to do this. And I've got a really good one. So you do have this concept of drill to views, and you would actually use you can use your View Explorer to kind of dictate how to present your drill to view, because you could actually present it as such where, once they exhaust the drill down of the original view itself, it would then pop them over to the new view. And so you can construct it so that, it just naturally navigates them to the next view once they exhaust their original drill down in their original view. So you'll decide where that's going to occur, whether it's going to be on the row or on the column, or you can even put it on the measure itself, and then they can click in on the measure, and it will actually drill them to whatever view that you specify as your drill to view. So one really good example, I told you I had a good example of this and why you'd want to use drill to views, is that maybe you're using a view and you have and you're using time range. So here I've got my year-to-date view. I'm looking at some customers, and I'm in September is my current month. So I've got a column here of January through September sales data, and so as a sales rep, it would be really cool to see where some of this, where in time for this year did some of the sales for this account occur. And guess what? By hypertexting and making my drill to view here on my measure, I can just click on that $45 million amount there for Wilder Foods, and it will then drill me to another view that would actually tell me exactly that. It would give me a view that is using time as a dimension as opposed to time as a range, And so instead of the user having to build this every time, which would be a nightmare, by the way, they can then just simply drill from that cell to this view, and they would then have a trending view of that customer. And depending on where they click, if I were to click here on Sumter, Eastern Division, on that 13 million number, it would then take me to the same view, but it would then filter on Sumter distribution. That to me is very, very cool, and it's something that, again, I think everyone should be using, especially, to present data such as this where, in one click, I can then assess each customer here and what their year-to-date trend is. And even more of that, as you can see, this you might want to include additional stuff. This view has average sale price in it as well by month, whereas this view, the original view, didn't have that information in it. So you can even present more detail if you wanted to as well without cluttering up the original view. So I guess the point of the day is go try drill two views and check, come up with a good example of how you might be able to use this, and then present that to your users and see how they like it. Okay, so that's huge, and that's a big tip. Another big tip is that a lot of times I'll go to a customer site and they'll complain about the performance of certain views. Or here's another example. They'll even complain about not necessarily the performance, because the performance has gotten a lot better with just native Windows 64-bit technology. But what they will say is that I've got all these views and they're all the same, but they have just different filters in them. I bet everyone out there is probably nodding their head. Yeah, I've got the same problem. I've got thousands of views, and probably 50% of them, or maybe not that many, God forbid, but 20, 30% of them are the same. They're redundant. A user might take a view and save it as another view and just change the filter. Well, that's not a good thing, because you don't want your views to be built, numbers of views to just exponentially grow. At the end of at a certain point, you're going to have thousands of views, and that's one thing you want to curb. You want to manage that a little bit better. So how do you do that? Well, one concept would be to learn for yourself and then train your power users out there who are building these views that you really don't need to build all these different views each time you have a different filter applied. Why not just build one view and then use parameter groups to allow the user to decide what filter to apply to the view? And then once they make the selection, the view then processes and presents the data to the user. And then that certainly would reduce all the redundancy of the views that are being created out there. So prompt before you run the view, allow the user then to select what it is that they're looking for, and then go ahead and allow them to then go ahead and run the view. Okay. And you can even, these are parameters, you can even pass it in from an outside system. So on top of prompting the user, you could also integrate viewer to other applications, such as maybe Salesforce.com, where they might be in that application, and then they can click on a link from there, and then would pop up a view for that particular customer that they're analyzing. So there's even more advanced things that you can do with these parameters that allow you to integrate it with other applications. So there's 4 different types of parameter groups that you can use. You've got the select members. You can present them with, here, go pick it yourself. Go find it yourself, what it is that you're looking for. You could also just give them a list of user lists, or you can just give them a simple drop-down, and you can also give them an expression. We talked a little bit about using expressions earlier. That's probably not the best thing to do, only because, they're probably, in this case, they're probably just wanting to select either from a list or, maybe from a drop-down might be some better choices here. And this is what they would see. So when they run the view, they'll actually get presented with, depending on how many you use, you can present them with different options. So in this case, I can either filter on a user list, I can go to a drop-down, I can actually search for the product, or I can write an expression. So I've got all 4 of them here presented, and giving the user the choice of which option they want to use to create this filter before they click OK, and then the view runs and presents the data as such. So instead of running the view for all products, they make a selection to use a user list called apples, which I would assume would give them all the Apple products, and then they click OK, and then the view runs and shows them only Apple products. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. These are things that again, before the view runs, it's going to show them this screen here. They have to pick something before they can move forward. You can actually make it required so that they can't, they must make a selection here before they can even run the view. Okay. So these parameters, again, these are pretty powerful in terms of here's what the drop-down would look like. So if you have, again, if it's at item level, it may not be the best way to present the data because it's going to shove thousands of items in their face. Probably not the best approach. But it works well for higher, not as detailed levels. Okay. So that's, and then, of course, I can use some of the other items there as well. So, all right. So that is parameter groups, and a great way to again, get rid of the redundancy of many thousands of your views if you suffer from that problem. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about display text properties. This is another very simple tip that will actually make, again, I think will make your views look better, and I think your users will appreciate it. But this is just a very simple thing that you can do at any level, and it will display the description as opposed to the actual code or value. For instance, customers, or better yet, product family, product models, different types of product aggregates where the customer or the user doesn't really care to see, product family 004, but they want to see product family vegetables versus product family of dried goods, or, whatever your different categories would be. That makes better sense, more business sense to them as opposed to just throwing in a code at them. So wouldn't it be better if I can just go in and say, well, let's just use the description instead of the code? And so what you would want to do in this case is use View Explorer to help you with some of that. If you open up your View Explorer, each level, notice that you can expand out your dimension levels here. And I've got my product level expanded out here. And I'm exposing now this second node, if you will. If I do if I right-click and do a properties check on that, I can actually then assess or make a selection on my display text option down here in my properties menu. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that menu down. I'm going to select long description for my display text. And what that does is it allows me to make my view look like this. So now instead of the product number, I'm actually looking at the product description. And again, this will work at any level, so you decide what works best. I think at some levels, customers want to see the code. Ironically, this is one of those levels. So, normally a lot of times sales guys want to see, customer or product numbers. Depending on how long they work there, they probably have some of them memorized. But not necessarily, again, product family, product models. That normally they do want to see this, just the description. So again, I think customers probably the same way. They probably want to see their customer numbers, but because they probably have a few of them memorized. So it really kind of depends, and it's different from company to company, but it does look cleaner. Notice that, instead of having two columns, one for my product number and one for my product description, why can't I just have one column and then they can just drill on that? Well, you can, and of course you can make it your description instead of the product number. Okay. And again, you can do this at any level. Another really good reason to do this is for your graphing. I get this question from time to time, quite frequently actually, and that is, Adam, how do we get this? I need to show my descriptions in my graph. And really the only way to do that is to use your display text property so that it shows the description in your view. So once you have that and you graph on it, naturally it's going to show the descriptions in your graph as well. because the graph just shows you basically what's in your data grid. There's no other way to do that other than this way right here. So probably a really good tip is display text properties. So make sure you check that out, and especially if you're graphing, I think that you'll find it'll help you out. Okay. Another really simple thing while we're here on View Explorer tips is just changing the axes of your measure items. So notice that you have a measure items folder. If I right-click and do a properties on that, I actually can make a change on whether I show my measures on my columns or my rows. So something that is quite that simple can make your view look like this versus something like that. Something a little bit more of a financial look to it versus more of a traditional sales report. Can you be just a difference of just changing your measures from, in this case, the column to my rows? And that's all that does. So you might find it helpful to do this depending on what exactly type of format or report that you're looking for. Okay. So something as simple as that to really make your view look quite different. Okay. Now, we're also going to talk about going back to filters a little bit. When you're filtering on your measure items, there's a great way to actually do top filtering and whatnot. So you have this concept of doing top and bottom filters, right? So whenever you right-click on a measure item, you can actually do a filter on your views. So what I like to do is maybe instead of going through some of these quite populated PowerPoints, I'd like to show you this concept along with some of the prior concepts that we just discussed. So if I go back into my, I'm actually using a demonstration. And in this case, we're looking at, this is actually the latest version of Viewer. So you might see some things here that you may not have access to. But overall, this is the latest version. So again, you might see some things here that you might want. So here I've got some of my views, and if I want to, I'm just going to run a simple sales comparison view here. So here's my sales comparison view, and so what I'm going to do here is notice that I've got sales this year versus last. I've got a variance column, and I want to basically filter and show my top 10 customers based on my sold to level here. So my top 10 customers, and I'm going to base that on my sales column right here. So I'm going to right-click on that and do a filter edit. And when I do that, whenever I filter on a measure item, I can actually go in and then select whether it's I want to see sales above a certain number or below a certain number. You know, of course you can do that. But here I want my top count. And you might ask yourself, well, which one do I use? You know, do I use top? Do I use recursive? Do I use overall? Well, it kind of depends, of course. If I just do a straight up top count, and I want my top 5 customers here, it's just going to basically give you that. It's going to give you your top 5 customers, and when I drill down on a given customer, it's going to show me my top 5, in this case, products. And it just basically, you know, basically works as simple as that. So it doesn't, the problem occurs if I drill down on the header, in this case, it shows me the top 5 for each one of my customers. Notice that it shows me, in this case, I've got these given customers, and then, let's see, top 5, and I drill down on the header, and so now I've got top 5 for each, top 5 items for every customer. So, you know, if I can actually drill to the rest of them or scroll down to the rest of my customers. All right. So that's kind of cool. But, you know, maybe I want to retain these top 5 customers. And so if I drill down on this header, instead of seeing all customers, maybe I just want to see these 5 customers. Well, that's where the recursive comes into play. So if I select my recursive top 5 and I do the same thing here, well, at the top level, you know, you're not really going to notice much because it's going to, you know, it's going to behave the same way. But if I click in on my header, instead of getting, notice, instead of 100 and some odd rows, we're now just getting 31 rows. And the reason for that is because it's retaining my top 5 customers. So now it's showing me top 5 products versus top 5 customers sold tos instead of all customers sold tos. So that's a big difference. And so that's the difference of why you might want to use top count, because that's always going to give you the top count. No matter where you drill, it's always going to give you the top count at that low level. So if I drill on one single customer, it's going to show me the top count for that one single customer for all my products. If I drill on all customers, it's going to show me, now it's just going to apply top 5 count at the lowest level. So it's assuming you want to see all customers, and then shows you the top 5 counts for each one of my customers sold to. Okay. So that's kind of the difference between those two. And then the final question would be, well, what does this overall top count thing does? What does this guy do? Well, this is kind of weird, actually. So if you use this one, it's going to behave very similarly. Like, for instance, if I drill in on a given customer, it's basically going to behave very similar to the other types of filters. But what happens when I drill in on the header? You're going to see some very, very interesting things when you drill in on the header using overall. And what it's actually doing is it's giving me the overall top 5 product and customer sold to combinations. So these combinations are my top 5. So Wilder buying peach in pairs, Harrington's buying my applesauce and my pineapples, and then the Western Division buying peaches. These are really, this is the meat of my business. These customers and these items are driving a good portion of my business. So these are my top 5 product and customer combinations, quite a bit different than what we've looked at before. Okay. So those are the differences. And so you might find a business scenario where you might want to use one versus the others. Okay. I'm trying to open it up for questions because I want to go ahead and wrap up. Does anybody have any questions about what they saw today, what we discussed today?
Recording started. Recording ended. Unmuted.
Any questions? Anybody asking a question?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. It took me a while to figure it out. I've unmuted everyone, so.
I was curious, is there a way to do the top 5 that you have there, and then have a line that has the total of the rest, all of the ones that are not in the top 5 in the same?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Good question. I meant to show that. Yes, there is. So, and it's driven by level, no less. It used to be just driven at the row or column level, but now you can dictate where that's going to occur by the different levels. So you might have multiple levels here. I only have 2. So, for instance, I'm going to do a properties now on that customer sold to level. So notice that my sold to level, a lot of times you'll come into View Explorer and it's going to look like this. So if you expand out your level, do a properties check on that second node in. So for instance, where it says customer sold to again, I do a property check on that, and you'll see quite a few options here. Okay. the one you want to use here is called All Others. So if I turn that on and I go ahead and apply it, now you're going to get that All Others break there down at the bottom. Okay. But if I drill to product, I won't get it because I didn't tell it to do it at product level. So if I want to see that at product level, I would basically just do the same thing. I would go into my properties menu at product level and say, oh, by the way, yeah, definitely want to do that at that level too. So now it's going to give me an All Others break at the product level as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, so again, you'll kind of dictate where that would occur, what levels, and, yeah, it would then just give them the amounts of everybody else that didn't make the cut. Good question. Any other questions about anything that we just discussed? Best practices. Do you have any problems with views performing? Is there some things that I can perhaps help with?
Hey, Adam, this is Ben with Hampton Farms. I was wondering if you could show the execution of that drill to views really quickly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So I think I have one here. Let's see. Give me a second here. I think I have one already built, but if I don't, I will build one for you. Here we go. Yeah. So here's an example. So I think Frank put this one together. So okay. So the concept here. Isn't that a pretty graph? All right. So the concept here then is to drill this user from this view to another one. And so here we've got a view of different products. Looks like I've got some filtering going on the columns here as well. For a given wrap sold to. So you want to keep that in mind because I'm assuming that they're here for a reason, and it's probably going to be passed to my target view. So before I drill to the view, notice that when I hover over product, it's going to tell me, click here to drill to view declining sales, drill to pricing graph. So it kind of tells the user, okay, well, you're going to go to a different view. And so how was this set up? So if you go to your View Explorer, you'll notice that product is really the only view the only level in my rows. And then I've got these other levels in my columns, as you can see over here, that are being filtered. So how do we set this up? So again, I'm going to expand out my product level, right? And I'm going to go into that second node, and I'm going to right-click and go to Properties on that. And you'll notice that, actually, you only have to do that if it's at the row level, now that I think about it. So I guess this kind of warrants a little explanation, and that would be, so given that it's at the row level, if I had multiple dimensions here, I would then have to exhaust my drill down in order to get to the drill to view, just so you understand that. Given that I only have one level there, it's going to basically take me from that level to the view. Okay? So again, if you had multiple levels here, the user would then have to exhaust the drill down, and then it would take them to the view. So by highlighting rows, I can then click my pull down menu on my drill to view, and select any view that I have access to then make the selection of, okay, what view is it that I'm going to drill the user to? Okay. And Frank chose that evidently he's got something really pretty that he likes to show people here. So that's declining sales. So let's take that's all there is to it. And so let's see what that does. Now there is more to it. That's all there is to it in terms of setting it up. Now, again, you're going to want to think about what it is you're trying to string together, right? I think more valuable, you know how to do it here. What do you do? I think the more valuable thing here is what is it that I'm going to show them? How am I going to how am I going to do this, and how is it going to be of some value to this business user? So for instance, if I drill this then in red right tomatoes, so I click on it, and now it's drilling me to a completely different view, as we see, and so it's then showing me information just for that one given item. Okay. It's not filtering on anything else other than that item that I chose to drill in on. And this view is quite a bit different because it's actually showing me time as a dimension here. Notice the day grid down here on the bottom. And it's basically showing me, looks like a rolling time sales amount. And then what my average selling price is for that. So here's my sales amount in the blue, and then my line graph is showing me the actual average selling price for that for this rolling time frame here. Looks like a 12-month rolling amount. So how do I go back to the other view? Well, notice that it actually opened up another instance of my browser. So if I just simply close that, my original view never went away. So what happens if I click on asparagus? Well, it's going to do the same thing, except it's now going to show me a different curve here, and it's going to show me my asparagus product. And it's just showing me, indeed, as I hover over my, and this is new, by the way. This view filter looks a little different now. So, but yeah, it basically is now showing me the graph based on asparagus, and so on and so forth. So I can just go back and highlight sweet onions. And then, again, it's going to drill me to the next view showing me my sweet onion product. And there it is. So, and, of course, the graphing and the pricing looks a little bit different here as well. So it would, so the original view essentially, notice also it's time ranged out as well. So this is actually using time range types of trending as well. Okay. And also the original view doesn't have the pricing in it. So the target view is showing me a little bit more on pricing. So you decide. I mean, you can decide on what it is. I think it works well by using my original concept. For a lot of times I'll be in training. I'll build a view and its time range. And then the rep would be, okay, now I'd want to see this trended. And I'm like, okay, well, you can add 11 more columns if you want to, or you can drill to make this really simple. It would involve a little more initial work, but you would just build a simple trending view using time as a dimension, and then drill them to that. As opposed to them having to add 11 columns on the fly. So that's kind of what I'm talking about. And then in terms of just setting it up, it's just really as simple as where do you want to put it. It could be on your rows, it could be on your columns. You can put a drill to view on your column, or like I said, you can put it on your measure items as well, and it's gonna hypertext your measure items as well. So play around with it, see what works well for you. But that's kind of how you set it up, and if you plan it properly, I think you can really get some cool things to show up.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I know we're coming up on an hour here. I appreciate everybody's time today. I want to thank everyone. We're going to have one more of these for the end of the year. So check us out in 2 more weeks. And I believe that one's on broadcasting, on the broadcast server. So make sure you're in on that 2 weeks from today. All right, everyone, have a great holiday. I probably won't be on that, so happy seasons to you, and have a safe holiday. And thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam.
The conference is ending.